Let's get to the U.S. sanctions on Iran. Show military action has failed. This is the nuclear motherlode of all sanctions. Scott Bessent is presenting it as such. They're calling it the economic D-Day. He said a whole bunch of nothing. I know. Of course he said a whole bunch of nothing because he has nothing. Because we have nothing. That's just the reality. We have nothing.
Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, is speaking about tackling Iran via financial sanctions.
Against Iran's financial connections around the globe. Our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains this tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. Iran's fanatics devote themselves to death to America and seek nuclear weapons to do just that. They have murdered and maimed more of our citizens and service members than any other terrorist regime on earth. And they have been at war against America, their neighbors in the Gulf, and much of the world for 47 years. President Trump has taken action that his predecessors have long deferred. And under his leadership, America is no longer managing the Iranian threat. We are ending it. Our great armed forces have laid the groundwork for achieving the President's objective of preventing Iran from ever obtaining nuclear weapons. They've shown America's resolve to finally end this threat. And the strength of America's economy under President Trump allows us to wage this sustained financial operation alongside the might of our military. Iran now faces a very clear choice with only two paths before them: complete global isolation and a subsistence economy, or a path back to normalcy with an opportunity to rejoin the global economy. Today, we are launching Operation Economic Outcast to foreclose every other option available to the Iranian regime. Treasury has mapped every node, every facilitator, and every network that Iran has used to smuggle oil and evade sanctions. Beginning today, the actions of Treasury and other agencies will tighten the noose and block every potential source of revenue that funds the IRGC and the evil Iranian regime. We are enforcing a zero leakage approach. There will be no minimal breathing space for the regime to rebuild its capacity to inflict terror against America and the world. The final refuge of this regime is a mistaken conclusion of nations that still finance the Iranian threat in the hopes of evading it. It is no longer acceptable to operate in the gray spaces of this conflict. Countries cannot claim they are blind to enabling this activity. Iran's enablers purchase, transport its petroleum. They facilitate the flow of its finances through exchange houses and free trade zones. They welcome Iran's flights and maintain registries on its behalf. They turn a blind eye to seaborne fuel transfers and overland transits. They condone illicit use of their banks, all the while concealing the extent of their complicity. The President is making phone calls to world leaders with specific requests to cease their interactions with the regime. We are already seeing results. Over the weekend, comments from Iranian leadership clearly acknowledged the effect of this campaign, and nations that facilitate any interactions with the regime should quickly heed our message. Those who stand with the United States will reap the rewards of our partnership. Those who tether themselves to the Iranian regime should expect to share in the isolation of a withering regime. Teams from Treasury, State, and the U.S. military are now meeting with their global counterparts to tell them that the United States expects action. Every country has a defined timeline to shut down activities we have identified. If they do not take action, we will do so unilaterally through Treasury authorities. For example, every branch of Bank Melay must be shuttered and dark. And let me be clear, any entity that facilitates money laundering on behalf of Iran will be removed from the US dollar system. The clock just started ticking. The new sectoral sanctions determinations issued.
The sanctions have to be full spectrum. You have to hit China and Russia. I covered this last week when they signaled that they were going to do the economic D-Day and mentioned that this would most likely not happen for two reasons. One, because you can't really sanction China without crippling your own economy, right? We know this already because Donald Trump tried it with the tariffs. The Liberty Day, the Liberation Day tariffs campaign failed. Part of that was hitting China with the maximalist tariffs and then backing away from it quietly after months and months of instability. Okay? Now, even in this reveal, you'll hear Bessent say something along the lines of secondary sanctions are coming. We're promising that secondary sanctions are coming. But then he also says, I hope I don't have to do it. Okay? He says, why would I want to blow up the global financial system? So they also recognize that it's not going to happen. So it's mostly just taking a threatening posture against a country that already has received these sorts of threats and has not backed away from them.
Today, target.
I think it's a foolhardy endeavor, and I don't even know who the target audience is for this. I don't think it's Xi Jinping.
5 of Iran's most vital lifelines that it exploits in other countries: digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping. These measures broaden secondary sanctions risk for anyone foolish enough to continue conducting business with this regime, and will accelerate the speed with which we pursue them. As I speak, Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control is also sanctioning over 60 entities, individuals, and vessels around the world that enable the Iranian regime to procure illicit nuclear and missile technology, conduct cyber operations, and generate oil revenue. This is a sustained campaign to collapse every last option for Iran. Let there be no ambiguity as to the position of the United States. An economic engagement of any kind with this murderous regime will expose those responsible to the full reach of American power. For decades, this regime.
This is what they did basically with Cuba, yes. But you can't do it with Iran because Iran is an energy provider. And not only is Iran an energy provider, Iran controls a global choke point for 20% of the global energy supply. Cuba doesn't. We can do this to weaker countries that we've weakened over multiple decades. But we can't do this to a country that is currently militarily controlling the Strait of Hormuz. That's it. It is in China's best interest to end the chaos in the Gulf. It's in China's best interest, considering that they get their oil and gas needs. They have their oil and gas needs met by the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, as well as Iran. But ultimately, they can't do this to China. Secondary sanctions would be to hit Iran's biggest trading partners: Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Turkey to a certain degree, China, and Russia. Russia has already been hit with the mother of all sanctions, so I don't know how much more space there is there for Russian sanctions. And you can't do this to China because China is the global manufacturing hub of the entire planet. And also on top of that, has additional leverage now because it's been engaging in price stability by artificially cutting down its imports of oil in an effort to make sure that the rest of the Asian continent, the rest of the Asia Pacific region is not experiencing tremendous shortages and collapsing their energy grid. That's it. I don't foresee China dropping Iran for no reason here, especially at a time when Iran behaving in an erratic manner would worsen the crisis overall. And China's response has been pretty unbowed. They've said, we will not abide by these sanctions. America tried testing this against China already because China was still purchasing Iranian oil throughout the conflict. And the American side came out and said, we're going to apply sanctions to Chinese companies and Chinese banks. that are processing these oil. They're processing these oil shipments, and China said, "No, you're not." Today, the U.S. announced Operation Economic Outcast, a new comprehensive economic pressure campaign against Iran and sanctioned 60 entities. 3 months ago, which is what I was talking about, the U.S. announced Operation Economic Fury, a new, more comprehensive economic pressure campaign against Iran and sanctioned 50 entities. So they already did this 3 months ago, and it went nowhere, and they're doing it again. I don't even know why they're doing it at this point. The same Besant who deluded himself into thinking back in April 2025 that all countries would join the U.S. in a grand economic encirclement of China, only to fold a few weeks later because no one joined. Now he's recycling the same script against Iran, and it's even more diluted because it requires the cooperation of China, the very country he tried and failed to isolate last year, and China is obviously refusing. So yeah, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. Why should anybody, at a time when America's global standing is in tatters, at a time when America's hegemonic superpower position is being threatened by its own missteps, by the way, by no one else. I guess maybe you could say Iran retaliated and won, and that obviously played a major role in destroying American force projection capabilities, destroying the confidence that people have in America as the world stabilizer, as the hegemonic superpower. Having said all of that, it is clear now, more than it was last year, more than it was in April 2025, more than it was 3 months ago, there is no way around this. That America has to play ball with China. And America has to concede to Iran. Tusi from CI Policy says, will the U.S. get China on board with intensifying Iran's economic strangulation? Beijing is moving the other way. After ordering firms not to comply with U.S. sanctions on Chinese buyers of Iranian oil, this was 3 months ago when they tried to test out the exact same thing. Its top court penalized a Singaporean firm for complying with U.S. sanctions. China's top court highlights first anti-foreign sanctions law ruling amid global tensions. A court judgment unveiled last month showed the Shanghai court ruled against the Singaporean firm in February, ordering it to pay more than 4.99 million yuan in damage plus interest, and holding that it could not use a foreign country's discriminatory restrictions as a defense under Article 12 of China's anti-foreign sanctions law. Batmangalic says, in today's press conference, Secretary Scott Bessent took no time to explain how ordinary Iranians would be protected from undue harm during his economic D-Day. Instead, his speech made it clear that the Iranian people are the targets of this new assault. The 5 sectors identified here are not lifelines for the Iranian state. They are lifelines for the Iranian people. Digital assets and gold are how ordinary Iranians protect their savings from inflation. Technology keeps Iranians connected to the world. Aviation keeps Iranian families connected with loved ones across borders. Shipping is how essential goods, including food and medicine, reach Iran. The Treasury Department has even rescinded general licenses covering academic and sports exchanges between the U.S. and Iran. These measures do not isolate the Iranian regime, which has hunkered down for years. They isolate the Iranian people. The Trump administration has no qualms about ordinary Iranians becoming targets in their economic war, just as they had no qualms about killing civilians in their military operations. But we knew that already.
David from Reuters.
Hi, thanks, Secretary. One of the most powerful tools you have at your disposal is the ability to impose secondary sanctions on banks and financial institutions that facilitate transactions for Iran. Chinese banks have often been talked about being targeted, but we don't see any of those institutions targeted here. Is that something that is coming in this campaign, or is the very delicate trade truce with China something that could prohibit you from going that far and taking that very big step?
We want to make clear here today that no one is above the reach of U.S. sanctions. That if they facilitate transactions and are part of the ecosystem that turns Iranian oil into money, into repression, they will be targeted. We find that the best way to engage with countries is through quiet diplomacy, and we are level setting with every country to tell them our expectations. We know who they are, they know who they are, so when the hammer of U.S. Treasury actions falls upon them, they will have no one to blame but themselves.
Big talk. Big talk coming from little power. Anyway, let's continue with Besant.
Has drawn strength from a calculus that regards Iranian retaliation as certain and American enforcement as negotiable. Under President Trump, that era is over. To the ordinary soldiers supporting this regime, as more and more of your paychecks stop or are supposedly just delayed, ask whether your commanders are leading your country to triumph or to ruin. And recall that the Berlin Wall fell when ordinary soldiers decided not to shoot at their own people. And to those who enable Tehran, do not discount the cost of testing Washington's resolve. No nation should expect to enjoy the rewards of our system while helping those who seek to destroy it. It is now a time for world leaders to make a decision between prosperity and isolation, peace and terror, America and Iran. The campaign we begin today will gather force with every day that follows, and it will not end until this regime stands alone.
Huge number of threats there by the Americans. Clearly, this administration, it has run out of patience, is well aware.
I mean, it's funny that even Western media, like Sky News, is covering this as like a recognition of American defeat. The title of this is Analysis: U.S. Sanctions on Iran Show Military Action Has Failed. These are some of our most important allies and their major arms of propaganda. It's unbelievably desperate, and of course, it's unbelievably cruel. Along with the new initiative and a bunch of new sanctions listing, U.S. is suspending existing GLs, permitting academic exchanges and professional amateur sports activities. They're trying to punish the regular Iranian society as aggressively as they possibly can because they've lost the war.
That it is on the back foot militarily, can't get itself out of this conflict. Scott Bessent appeared there to be just suggesting that this was another lever, the big lever that America has been reluctant to pull thus far. But it is also clearly an indication of the realization that military action, while it has been devastating, has not had the desired consequences. Iran is still able to do what it was doing before. It still has a nuclear program of sorts, perhaps obliterated, but it still has the know-how, the capability to rebuild that. And of course, it now has newfound leverage with the Strait of Hormuz and the ability it has had to cause havoc with the world energy prices and the world energy market and world oil prices. There were some moments that stuck out to me. He said that any enemy who facilitates money laundering on behalf of Iran will be removed from the US dollar.
By the way, money laundering is just normal trade relations with two foreign countries. Two foreign countries that we should have no connection to, that we have no say over. Conducting regular trade is now a major issue, a major
system, and that countries will have a finite timeline to shut down activities identified by the Treasury. He hasn't gone into any specifics there, but it's clear, I think, that the Americans are really, truly running out of patience with Iran. They want to bring the country back to the negotiating table, and in order to do that, they are now applying what they say is economic D-Day for the Iranians. It's worth saying that Mohammad Ghalibaf, who is the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, a key figure within the administration, one of the most vocal figures in terms of putting out reaction to whatever the Americans might do. He, in the last hour, has put on social media, Americans know that no one buys their bombast. The United States is not in an economic position to further restrict its relations with other countries. Iran's trading partners, both in the media and through messages sent to us, have made it clear that they don't take these statements into account anywhere. So that is the first reaction we've had from part of the Iranian regime to this latest attempt by the Americans to pull them into line.
Yeah, it's, Mark, just a quick word on Canada, because look, Canadians may have been watching that from Scott Bessent, thinking, with friends like them, who needs enemies, given the ongoing enmity between them over.
Yeah. It's additionally stupid to reveal this sanctions package and claim that you're going to apply secondary sanctions to countries that are doing normal trade with Iran in any way, shape, or form. A couple days after you also supposedly had a trade deal with Canada that fell apart because of the insane demands that you made in the last hour towards Canada, to which then turned into another tariff war with Canada, another one of our major trade partners. Between Canada, Mexico, and China, that's like 70% of American trade. Okay? It's insane. Like 30% of that comes directly from China. And a large chunk of the rest of our trade comes from Canada and Mexico. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know where, I just don't know where this goes, okay? I don't know. I don't understand what the administration is trying to do with this. Normally, I would scratch the surface and like identify some kind of logical through line behind the initiatives, but at this point, it just unironically comes across as like Donald Trump wildly posturing in this belligerent manner, or directly trying to bankrupt the country, directly trying to destroy America. I don't know. Canada's threatening to cut electricity and minerals to the U.S. This is from the Associated Press. Canada threatens to cut off all electricity and critical minerals to the U.S., including high-grade nickel and uranium, if the Canada-U.S. trade war worsens, per the AP. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says, I'll cut him off. You won't get a grain of sand out of Ontario, adding, what would they do without the high-grade nickel? Ontario Premier Doug Ford says everything's on the table, including power to 1.5 million American homes and high-grade nickel and uranium after Trump announced 50% tariffs on Canadian autos, parts, and steel starting next year, and 50% tariffs on $20 billion worth of Canadian goods Saturday. Could you have imagined a decade ago? Well, I guess a decade ago Trump came into power, but like, yeah, a decade ago, before Trump came into power, that we would one day talk about, a ongoing tariff war with Canada. I know the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, is just posturing. But could you ever imagine that a moment necessary of this kind of posture would ever come about? I certainly can't. It's unimaginable. I don't think they're going to do it, but I'm just saying, like, the very fact that this conversation is taking place is completely fucking insane. We're desperately trying to find victory anywhere we possibly can. And in that moment of belligerence, destroying what remains of our standing in the globe. It's ridiculous. Today, VP Vance said Canada and China are the two worst countries on trade policy. That's an opinion. He's right. But because Vance specifically complained about Canada's super high dairy tariffs, which again only kick in above a quota, here are some interesting World Trade Organization data via Trevor Tomby. 96.7% of U.S. agricultural exports to Canada are duty-free, compared to 4.5% of U.S. agricultural exports to China. The sheer number of lies from President Trump about Canada growing again today is remarkable. Just some fact checks from the last 18 months. Daniel Dale, the number one fact checker from Trump 1, coming back. Trump falsely said today that Canada's unemployment rate is 10% and rapidly rising. Though it is 6.4% under the Canadian method that adds about a percentage point and has been declining for 3 months. Trump falsely said today that Canada does 95% of its business with the U.S., though 72% of Canadian exports went to the U.S. last year. Trump falsely said today that high Canadian agricultural tariffs have caused the entire U.S. trade deficit with Canada, though that deficit is overwhelmingly caused by U.S. imports of cheap Canadian crude, and though something like 97% of U.S. agricultural exports to Canada are tariff-free. Like, it's upside down. Everything he's saying about Canada is the exact opposite. Everything he says about everything is the exact opposite of the truth. At this point, it sometimes feels like Donald Trump is just simply lying because he's incapable of saying things that are truthful. Trump has falsely claimed Canada generally doesn't take U.S. agricultural exports, though Canada is the world's second biggest buyer of those exports. Trump has falsely said that the Canadian public likes the idea of becoming the 51st state, which the Canadian public overwhelmingly opposes. Trump has falsely said Canada is one of the world's highest tariff countries, though it is actually low in World Trade Organization rankings. Trump has falsely said Canada essentially doesn't have a military, though its military has fought with the U.S. in multiple wars and its force size ranks in upper half of NATO. Trump has falsely said Canada hiked its dairy tariffs during the Biden administration, though they hadn't changed since Trump's first presidency. Trump has falsely said the U.S. trade deficit with Canada is $200 billion, though it is nowhere close. Trump has falsely said Canada prohibits U.S. banks, though it doesn't And though more than a dozen U.S. banks were operating in Canada at the time he spoke, Trump has falsely said Canada is constantly surrounded by Chinese and Russian ships, though that is fiction. Trump has falsely said then outgoing Prime Minister Trudeau was using their trade battle to run again for Prime Minister, though Trudeau obviously wasn't running. He literally fucking dropped out. Everything he's saying is a complete lie, okay? Trump on Doug Ford. Trump says lots of bluster from Doug Ford, who is the premier of the Canadian province of Ontario, but who is better known for the less charismatic, intelligent, overall unimpressive brother of the late, great Rob Ford. Oh, my God. He hit the Rob Ford is much better than you line, which is, I mean, I guess he's not wrong. God, I hope that our Canadian comrades are standing strong in opposition to the American menace. I apologize on behalf of all Americans. I apologize on behalf of the American government. I'm sorry that this is happening. Hopefully, we will be able to overcome these problems with the current administration and change the American trajectory for the better. We're working on it, even though, you know, there's a tremendous amount of resistance from our own elected representatives.
Trading arrangements. And of course, there was a question asked by one of our colleagues there, Scott Bessent, of that very thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is another issue altogether, although clearly it's wrapped up in Scott Bessent's remit, and that is the full trade war that is now on with Canada, tit for tat. We saw over the weekend some strong language by Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, in reaction to Trump's latest moves. And Mark Carney saying that so often the American signatures are signed in pencil. In other words, what are they actually worth? And I think on that, the Iranians might agree. And I think that's the challenge that the Americans have got, that Donald Trump has got right now, is that he can send out his Treasury Secretary to make the pronouncements we've just heard. But to what extent can he actually follow through? And to what extent will he back up the words with actions? We will see both on the trade war with Canada, which threatens to be really quite unpleasant for both countries, and also the real war with the Iranians.
In Tehran today, pensioners from the state telecom company were protesting about the cost of living, which is spiralling. And in the oil-rich province of Khuzestan in the south, the same complaint. Our kitchen tables are empty, says this man, as annual inflation runs at over 100%, ruling out any idea of a comfortable retirement.
خاک تو سر اون مسئوله بی‌کفایت بی ارزه نمیدونم چی باید دیگه بگم.
Here, the owner of a garage, we don't know where, takes his own risks by daring to speak out. He's complaining about the cost of replacing the brake lights on a car. To hell with incompetent, useless officials, he says. I don't even know what else to say. In Tehran, a giant poster shows Donald Trump sinking beneath the waves after almost 6 months of war, though it's millions of Iranians who are struggling with the very opposite of nirvana. This morning, the rial plunged to its lowest level against the dollar since the revolution of 1979, amid what the US government openly describes as an attempt to collapse the Islamic Republic with the toughest sanctions in history. Earlier this year, thousands were killed in what began as economic protests against the regime. Yet, as the situation worsens, Iranians are finding their voices once again.
This depreciating rial is shrinking people's kitchen tables. They say it has no impact, but how is that even possible? We are feeling the effects with every fibre of our being.
Some basic foods are subsidised with government coupons sent to low-income households. But inflation is so rampant that there's a growing mismatch between what is available in the shops and what many Iranians can actually afford. An Iranian documentary filmmaker sent us this video of his family's fridge. It's seen better days, he says. This is the reality for Iranian families. a reality which is beginning to temper the government's usual bravado about winning this war.
People should know that the authorities understand the hardships they're facing. I believe we need to speak honestly and openly with people. American pressure cannot continue indefinitely, and I can say with confidence that they need this situation to end more than we do.
Yet while Americans face high petrol prices, Iranians are enduring more sanctions, more economic isolation. And the Trump administration hopes that a rising level of public anger will force the regime to negotiate.
Now, Donald Trump has accused Canada of ripping off the United States for years and threatened more 50% tariffs on imported vehicles, car parts and steel starting next year. Trade negotiations between the two countries broke down last week, and tonight Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said there had been progress, but the momentum reversed. That's a NATO ally, but in the last hour, the US Treasury Secretary has announced an economic onslaught against Iran and its financial networks. Our US editor Anushka Astana joins us from Washington. Anushka.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just come here from the US Treasury. So let me start with Iran. Scott Bessent basically announced what he called Operation Economic Outcast, in which he promised to really hit Iran hard. Now, it sounds pretty familiar to the journalists who were in the room, because back in April, they turned to the economic sanctions for the first time and they said they were going to have Operation Economic Fury. They said that was going to be maximum pressure on Iran. But as you will have noticed, Iran has still not capitulated. It is still trying to use that chokehold in the Strait of Hormuz. So that's why we're getting this. And the reason it's called Outcast is that it's all about isolating Iran. It's all about targeting the other countries that do business with Iran, threatening them with secondary sanctions if they don't break off those ties. Now, at one point, Scott Bessent compared to this to D-Day during the Second World War, but he was pointed out to that D-Day was action then, not the threat of action. And so someone asked him, why aren't you putting these sanctions in place now?
Why would I want to blow up the global financial system? We believe that it is important to level set and give people a cure period, but they should know that that will move very quickly and that we are serious. The reason we are able to use secondary sanctions is because we do not take their use lightly. So we believe that a warning shot and a level set of expectations is appropriate.
So the language is very, very strong. He's admitting that secondary sanctions could blow up the global financial system. Well, you can read into that the US doesn't want to use them. It's hoping that the warning shot might be enough. It points to the UAE, for example, breaking ties with Iran. But are other allies going to do that? Is Pakistan really going to do that? And most of all, is China? China have said in recent days that it doesn't believe sanctions will work and that it won't be bullied.
All this while the trade war with Canada is intensifying.
Yeah, things are very, very spiky when it comes to the Canadian-US relationship. This weekend, as you'll know, there were 50% tariffs put on $20 billion worth of exports. Mark Carney came out and said enough is enough, we're not having this. Now there has been a response today from Donald Trump threatening more tariffs on cars in January. He's gone to Truth Social to say that. Well, we've heard today from Mark Carney, and also Scott Bessent addressed this in the Treasury just now. Have a listen to what they said.
The goal of our trade negotiations with the United States has always been to get the best deal for Canadians, never a deal at any price or on any time frame. We did make some progress in recent weeks. In the end, that momentum reversed, and we could not accept what the U.S. had offered, nor could we give what they asked.
Prime Minister Carney rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump platform. I believe he was more than 20 points behind, and he seems to have gone back to his old playbook. And I think one has to ask oneself, is he trying to benefit himself, the Liberal Party, or the Canadian people?
Now, inside the White House, Donald Trump is still going on Truth Social. He's saying that Canada needs the US does not need Canada. But in truth, Canada is very important for the US economy. And in truth, Iran has been very effective in harming the US economy as well as the global economy when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, which is a big headache for the president here.
Thanks, Anushka. Well, I'm joined now by Mohammad Marandi, a professor at Tehran University, a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiating team and close to the authorities there. Well, we heard Scott Bessent threatening an economic D-Day, and then he said, well, I don't actually want to blow up the global financial system. What do you think the Iranian government will make of his threat?
Well, first of all, which authorities am I close to exactly? What does that mean? When you speak to professors at British universities, do you say that they're close to authorities, or is that for me because I'm Iranian?
Let's not know. I know that you are influential and you are close to the Iranian government, and you've been part of the nuclear negotiating team. You know, you were in Beirut. You went to Pakistan. When the negotiations happened, you are close to the authorities. That's why we speak to you, because you know what's going on. So tell me what you think they'll make of it.
You're using that as propaganda.
No, I'm not. I'm using it to
me.
No, I'm doing the opposite. I'm doing the opposite, actually.
Discredit me.
Let's not.
You're not letting me talk.
No.
When I was in Beirut, I was not there on behalf of the government. I was there on behalf of my.
I'm not trying to discredit you. I'm actually trying to say you know what's going on in Iran because you are close to people in power. I'm actually doing the opposite of discrediting you. So I'm asking you, what do you think they will think?
I'm an academic at the University of Tehran.
Okay, fine.
And I do not have any government position. And if you want, you can invite someone else.
No, okay, fine.
Just going back to your propaganda piece.
Let's not get hung up on.
You said the Iranian. In your propaganda piece, you said the Iranian regime, the Trump administration, and you showed people protesting. And then you said people are finding their voices. But you don't recall, apparently, that millions of people went to the streets just recently for the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei. Millions were protesting the attacks on the elementary school.
And we've showed those pictures. We have reported that as well. But it's clear that some people are struggling and some people are not happy about it as well.
But it's because the United States is carrying out crimes against humanity. They bombed the country, they bombed hospitals, schools, they bombed apartment blocks, and they imposed sanctions to strangle ordinary people. The objective is to strangle these people. We've talked about all of that
in the past. I want to talk to you about these economic sanctions.
That's not what your propaganda piece said.
Let's put that to one side. I'm asking you about this American threat. Do you think it's credible? You know, will it scare anyone in the Iranian government? And do you think it can be enacted?
No, it's not going to scare anyone in the Iranian government. It's not going to scare the bulk of the Iranian people who worked very hard to defeat this war of aggression. And Iran will tolerate, or Iran will be forced to accept the pain in order to defeat the United States. And that's what has happened so far. The United States has carried out war against our people. It has massacred children in schools. It has massacred girls playing volleyball in La Mer, in La Mer. And of course, your government never condemned the United States, and your journalists don't condemn the United States. But Iran will persevere because Iran knows that this is an unjust war. And the sin of the Iranian people is that they oppose genocide. We already had D-Day. Wasn't D-Day the first day of the war against Iran?